The town of Wexford was a place no one ever looked at twice, a flat stretch of farmland wrapped in barbed fences and dust roads, where days rolled into one another without incident. To outsiders it was a quiet dot on the map, but to Emily Rhodes it was a cage she had quietly learned to endure. She was 32, plain-featured, with the kind of face that blended into grocery lines and bus stations. She wore her brown hair tied back in a simple braid, her clothes practical and her voice soft. Nobody in town thought much of her. At the diner where she worked, customers sometimes forgot to look at her when they ordered. She lived in a small rented room above the feed store, her world measured in footsteps and small acts of routine. To most, she was just another shadow in the background of life. But Emily had a secret rhythm inside her bones, a quiet discipline that the world had never been allowed to see. It began one summer morning when she passed the county fairgrounds on her way home from the diner. A local charity event was underway, complete with hay bales, raffle tables, and a makeshift shooting booth that drew the attention of half the town. The organizers had set up cardboard silhouettes as targets, offering anyone a chance to take 3 shots with a pellet gun for a prize. Emily stopped for no reason she could explain. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the boys from the high school take turns and miss, laughing at each other, the pellet rounds hitting everything except the bullseyes. The booth owner kept replacing the targets, his motions quick and tired, until at one point he glanced up and asked Emily if she could give him a hand. Without a thought she stepped forward. She took the targets, walked out to the stands and pinned each one with careful precision. The paper shifted in the wind, snapping like restless flags, but her hands were steady. She turned and saw the crowd for the first time, faces she'd seen her whole life, suddenly noticing her in a way they never had before. She was about to step back into obscurity when a voice, low and calm, reached her from the far edge of the booth. "You've got good hands," the man said. He wasn't from town, Emily could tell at once. His stance was too sharp, his shoulders too square, his eyes scanning everything like a hawk circling. He was dressed in worn jeans and a dark t-shirt, but there was nothing ordinary about him. Later she would learn his name was Sam Callan, a Navy SEAL on leave, but in that moment he was simply a stranger who looked at her as though she wasn't invisible. She felt her throat tighten under the weight of his gaze. The boys at the booth were still laughing, still missing their marks, when Sam stepped forward and picked up the pellet gun. His motions were quiet, efficient, like water finding its level. 3 shots rang out, each one splitting the center of the targets Emily had just hung. The crowd went silent, admiration tempered with surprise. But Sam didn't look at them. He turned to her. He extended the rifle, not as a challenge but as though he was passing her something she already owned. "Your turn," he said simply. Emily blinked, caught between protest and fear. She wanted to say no. She was a waitress, not a marksman, a woman who folded napkins and poured coffee refills. But the way he held the rifle out, steady and patient, felt like something else. Asking her to shoot, but asking her to believe in herself. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool metal, and the booth owner barked a laugh. "She's never fired anything in her life," he scoffed. The crowd joined in with small chuckles, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped up to the line. The rifle was heavier than she expected, her arms trembling slightly as she raised it. The paper targets danced in the sunlight, daring her to fail. For a moment, the noise of the fairgrounds drowned into silence, the laughter fading into nothing. She remembered afternoons as a girl when her father had let her stack tin cans on the back fence and aim with his old BB gun, his hands guiding hers, his voice telling her to breathe steady and wait. She hadn't touched a weapon since. The memory pressed through the years like a ghost returning, and without thinking she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. The pellet tore through the paper just shy of the center ring. Gasps rose from the crowd. She lowered the rifle, her chest burning with a sudden heat. Sam's eyes flickered, not with surprise but with approval. "Again," he said. She took another breath, raised the rifle and fired. This time the round struck closer to the center, the paper jerking back with clean precision. The laughter had died now, replaced with murmurs. The boys shifted uneasily, their earlier smirks dissolving. Emily's hands steadied, her fear cooling into something sharper. She fired the 3rd shot, and when the target split dead center, the silence that followed was louder than applause. Almost afraid of what she had just done. Sam reached out, took it from her and nodded once. "Told you," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, like he had seen something in her the rest of the town never cared to look for. She stood frozen as the crowd began to clap awkwardly, unsure if they were celebrating her or mocking their own surprise. But for Emily none of it mattered. For the first time in her life she felt seen. When she walked away from the booth she expected the moment to fade, like everything else in her small life. Yet as she reached the edge of the fairgrounds, Sam was there, waiting, his posture relaxed but his eyes fixed on her. "You've got a natural aim," he said. "Not many people do. Ever thought about why?" She shook her head, words stuck in her throat. "Maybe you should," he added before stepping back into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. That night, lying in her small rented room, Emily couldn't close her eyes. The sound of the rifle, the feel of the trigger, the memory of the target splitting dead center replayed over and over. She wasn't just the invisible waitress anymore. Something had shifted, like the world had pulled back a curtain she didn't know was there. And though she couldn't explain why, she knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning. The following days in Wexford carried on with the same dull rhythm as always: morning chores, the low hum of tractors in the distance, the diner filled with the clink of silverware and half-hearted conversations. But for Emily Rhodes nothing was the same anymore. Every time she picked up a coffee pot or carried a plate to a table, the silence that had fallen over the crowd before her third shot rang out. It was absurd, she told herself. It was just a pellet gun, a carnival game. Yet it felt like a door had opened, one she didn't know existed. She kept replaying the moment Sam Callan had looked at her, not with condescension or mockery, but with something that felt like respect. She didn't expect to see him again. People like him didn't linger in towns like Wexford. But 3 days later, when she stepped out behind the diner to take out the trash, he was leaning against the brick wall, arms folded, the same calm watchfulness in his eyes. Emily froze, her pulse leaping. "You scared me," she said, forcing her voice steady. Sam shrugged. "You carry yourself like someone who shouldn't be scared so easily." He straightened and handed her something wrapped in cloth. She hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside lay a small air rifle, heavier and sharper than the pellet gun at the fair. "It's not loaded," he said, his voice low, careful. "But it's a start. I want you to practice. Real grip, real weight. You've got something most people don't, and you don't even know it yet." Emily blinked, confused and defensive. "Why me? I'm nobody." Sam's expression didn't change. "I've spent half my life training people who thought they had what it takes, only to watch them fold under pressure. You didn't fold. You stepped up in front of a crowd that wanted you to fail. That's not nothing." His words landed heavy in her chest. She wanted to argue, to hand the rifle back and retreat into the safety of obscurity. But trigger steady, wanted to listen. That evening, long after the diner had closed, she took the rifle to the edge of a field outside town. The moon hung low, silver light spilling across the stalks of corn. Sam was already there, a small lantern set on the ground, metal targets arranged at different distances. He spoke little, his instructions precise. How to breathe. How to align the sights. How to let the body relax so the shot didn't tremble. Emily obeyed, clumsy at first, but soon the rhythm returned. The same ghost of her father's voice, the same patience buried deep in her muscles. One shot clanged against the metal, another went wide, the next found its mark. Each success lit a spark inside her, and each failure only sharpened her focus. Sam studied her without expression, but she felt the weight of his approval in the silence between shots. Hours passed unnoticed until her arms ached and her eyes burned. At last he stepped forward, took the rifle from her hands and nodded. "That's enough for tonight." She expected him to lecture, to tell her she wasn't good enough yet. Instead he said, "You've got balance. Not just aim. Balance. That's rare." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Don't waste it." In the days that followed, their secret meetings became a pattern. She worked at the diner by day, a ghost in her apron, and when the sun went down she slipped out to the field where Sam waited with rifles, targets, and the kind of patience she had never known. She learned quickly, faster than either of them expected. Her shots grew sharper, her breathing steadier, her stance more natural, but the pieces she gathered painted a picture she couldn't ignore. A man shaped by war, carrying invisible scars, who had seen too much death to waste time on small talk. And yet he was here, choosing to teach her. One night, as they sat on the back of Sam's truck between practice rounds, Emily finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why me? Really? You could train anyone. Why pick the waitress who nobody notices?" He looked at her for a long time, his jaw tight as if weighing whether to answer. "Because," he said at last, "you don't know you're capable. That makes you dangerous in a way no one expects. And sometimes the people no one sees are the ones who make the biggest difference. Her chest tightened at his words. Dangerous. It felt strange, almost absurd to hear it from her. But when she remembered the way the crowd had fallen silent at the fair, the way the laughter had died after her shot split the target, she wondered if he was right. For the first time the idea didn't scare her. It excited her. Still, the secret weighed on her. In town, she was still Emily the waitress, the plain woman with polite smiles and tired eyes. No one knew that at night she was learning to shoot, to focus, to control something powerful in her hands. She didn't tell a soul, not her co-workers, not her landlord, not even the old woman who sometimes asked her to walk her dog. The training belonged to her alone, a hidden world that made the rest of her life feel smaller, paler. And then one night after practice, as they packed up the rifles, Sam grew still, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Emily followed his by the lights dark, engines silent. She couldn't see who was inside, but the hair on her arms prickled. Sam placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Get in the truck," he said, his voice low but urgent. She opened her mouth to protest, but his tone allowed no argument. "Now." As she slid into the passenger seat, her heart racing, Sam stood there a moment longer, watching the silent vehicles like a predator weighing its prey. When he finally climbed in and started the engine, Emily dared a whisper, "Who are they?" Sam didn't answer right away. He drove fast, the tires spitting gravel into the night. At last he said, "People I thought I'd left behind." Emily's stomach sank. In that instant she realized this was no game, no harmless training in the fields. Whatever Sam was running from, or fighting against, had just found them. And somehow she was part of it now. The road out of Wexford was a black ribbon stretching into nowhere, flanked by cornfields and shadows that seemed to move with the truck. Emily sat stiff in the passenger seat, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Sam's grip on the wheel was steady, but his eyes scanned the mirrors with the restless focus of a man who had survived too many nights like this. The hum of the engine felt too loud, each mile heavier than the last. Emily finally broke the silence. "You know them, don't you?" she whispered. Sam's jaw tightened, the faintest flicker of hesitation passing across his face. "Yeah," he said at last. "And if they're here, it means something's coming I hoped you'd never see." The words fell on her mystery from him. He had always carried that weight, but this was different. Whoever those men were, they weren't just ghosts from his past. They were threats made flesh. She tried to breathe evenly, tried not to let the panic show, but questions crowded her mind faster than she could control them. What had she stepped into? Why her? And what in God's name did they want? Sam's headlights cut through the night until he turned suddenly onto a dirt path leading deep into the woods. The truck jolted, branches scratching against the sides like claws. He killed the lights, letting the vehicle roll to a stop under a canopy of trees. The silence pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. Emily swallowed hard. "Are we hiding?" Sam shook his head, his voice calm, almost too calm. "No. We're watching." He pointed through the rear view. In the distance, faint beams of headlights swept across the road they had just left. Two trucks slowed, idled, then split, one heading toward town, the other crawling in the direction Sam had just come from. "They're searching," Emily realized aloud. Sam nodded. "They don't know where we went. Yet." He reached under the seat, pulling out a black duffel. Inside, Emily saw the glint of steel, magazines of ammunition, a knife strapped to the side. The sight sent a chill through her, reminding her with brutal clarity that Sam Callan wasn't just some soldier on leave. He was a man built for war, and war had found him again. Emily's breath caught when he turned and placed a handgun on her lap. The weight was shocking, heavier than the rifle she had. Trained with, colder against her skin. She stared at it like it might bite her. "I can't," she whispered. Sam's eyes locked on hers. "You can. And you might have to." His tone wasn't harsh, but firm, as if he wasn't giving her an option. The world doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes it shoves you into the fight whether you're ready or not. She wanted to argue, to shove the weapon back into his hands, but the look in his eyes froze her words. He believed she could. He believed it more than she did herself. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Emily curled her hand around the grip, her thumb brushing the safety. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, every nerve on fire. Sam leaned closer, his voice low. "Remember what I taught you. Balance, breathe. The rest will follow." For a long time nothing happened. They sat in silence, the night air thick with the smell of pine and damp soil. Emily could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then, faint but growing louder, came the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights broke through the trees, cutting across the forest floor like searchlights. One of the trucks had doubled back. Sam's hand brushed her shoulder, steadying her. "Stay low. Don't move until I say." He stepped out quietly, moving like a shadow, rifle in hand, his figure disappearing into the tree line. Emily's throat closed. She wanted to call him back, to beg him not to go, but her voice refused to work. She sat frozen in the truck, the handgun heavy on her lap, the world outside narrowing into sound, the rumble of the engine, the crunch of boots on dirt, the faint mutter of men's voices drifting. Two figures emerged from the truck, flashlights sweeping across the ground. They moved with practiced caution, their postures unmistakably military. Whoever they weren't just random drifters. They were trained, dangerous, and hunting. Emily's grip on the handgun tightened, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She told herself she was invisible, just another shadow in the dark. But then one of the flashlights swung too close, the beam landing on the dust stirred by Sam's truck tires. The man barked a signal to his partner, pointing toward the woods. They were following his trail. Panic surged through her, a scream trapped behind her lips. She wanted to run, but her body stayed locked in place. And then, just beyond the tree line, the silence broke. One sharp crack, then gunfire. The flashlights jerked wildly, beams scattering as one of the men fell. The other dove for cover, shouting into a radio clip to his vest. Emily's stomach lurched. This was real, not practice, not paper targets or carnival games. This was life and death. She pressed her forehead to the wheel, her hands trembling around the weapon. She hated herself for being so afraid, but somewhere under the fear was something else. A spark, faint but alive. The memory of Sam's voice. "You didn't fold." The second man crawled closer to the truck, his flashlight slicing through the dark. Emily saw the glint of metal in his hand, the unmistakable curve of a rifle barrel. He was too close, far too close. She raised the handgun, her arms shaking, sights dancing across his shadow. Her breath stuttered. Every nerve screamed at her to pull the trigger, but she hesitated, terror anchoring her to the seat. And then, as the man lifted his rifle toward the truck, something inside her snapped. She exhaled, just as Sam had taught her, and squeezed. The handgun roared, deafening inside the cab. The man's flashlight dropped, the beam spinning wildly before it hit the dirt. He collapsed beside it, still. Emily stared, frozen, the weapon shaking in her hands. The forest was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence after violence, heavy and raw. A moment later, Sam emerged from the trees, his face unreadable as his eyes flicked to the fallen men. Then he looked at her. For the first time, she couldn't read the expression in his gaze. It wasn't just approval. It was something deeper, heavier. "You just crossed the line." His voice carrying both warning and recognition. He opened the driver's door, his tone leaving no room for denial. "And there's no going back." The drive back through the woods was silent, but not the kind of silence Emily had grown used to in her quiet town. This was heavier, suffocating, broken only by the grind of tires over dirt. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, the handgun resting on her lap, her ears still ringing from the shot she had fired. The body of the man she had killed lay behind them in the darkness, but his weight was still with her, pressing against her chest like a stone she couldn't shake off. Sam's eyes stayed on the road, sharp and cold, but she could feel the unspoken tension rolling off him. She had expected him to comfort her, to tell her she had done what she had to. Instead, he gave her silence, the kind of silence soldiers carried after battle. She tried to speak, but her throat closed. The memory of the man's flashlight beam jerking as he fell replayed again and again in her head, each time sharper, each time cutting deeper. Finally, her voice cracked through the air. "I killed him." The words tasted bitter, alien, as if saying them made them real. Sam didn't look at her. "You saved yourself." "That's different." "Is it?" she whispered. The silence that followed told her he didn't have an answer, or maybe that the answer was too complicated to give. The headlights caught the open stretch of highway ahead, and Sam pressed the accelerator, leaving the woods and the shadows behind them. By the time they reached his safe house, a small cabin tucked into the far side of the county, Emily's legs shook as she stepped out of the truck. The cabin was plain, built of old wood and stone, but inside it carried the unmistakable marks of a soldier's life. Maps pinned across the walls. Shelves stacked with gear. Weapons laid out with clinical precision. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress disguised as one. Sam set his rifle down and turned to her. "Sit," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. She obeyed, lowering herself onto the worn couch, her hands still trembling. He poured her a glass of water and handed it over. "Drink." She did, the liquid cool against her dry throat. But the taste couldn't wash away the image of what she had done. Finally she found her voice again. "Tell me what's happening. Tell me why men are hunting you, why I had to." She couldn't finish, her breath hitching. Sam leaned against the table, his eyes shadowed. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he did. "They're private contractors," he said quietly. "Not the kind you hire to build houses. The kind you pay to erase problems. I worked missions once that made enemies I couldn't see, enemies with money and reach. When I walked away from the Navy, I thought I'd left that life behind. I was wrong." He glanced toward the window as if expecting headlights to appear at any moment. "Now they're here. Which means I've been marked again. And because you were standing next to me, they'll mark you too." The words sank into her like ice. She wanted to protest, to say she had nothing to do with any of this, that she was just a waitress in a small town, invisible, unimportant. But the truth had already revealed itself in the woods. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had fired a gun. She had life. There was no going back to the safety of being nobody. Emily set the glass down, her fingers still trembling. "So what now? Do I just wait here until they come for us?" Sam's gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. "No. You train. You get sharper, stronger. Because when they come, and they will, you're either ready or you're dead." The bluntness of it made her flinch, but beneath the fear was something else, something that had been growing since the county fair. She didn't want to be a victim. She didn't want to shrink back into the life of invisibility she had known. For the first time she wanted to fight. The days that followed blurred into a harsh rhythm. Morning runs through the woods until her lungs burned. Afternoons spent on the firing range Sam had built behind the cabin, the sound of gunfire echoing through the trees. Nights bent over maps as he taught her how to read terrain, how to see patterns where others saw chaos. Sam drilled her mercilessly, not with cruelty but with precision. Each mistake was corrected, each weakness exposed. Emily stumbled, failed, broke down in tears more than once. But every time he made her get back up. And each time she rose, she felt a little stronger. Still, the shadows of what she had done haunted her. She woke in the middle of the night, the image of the fallen man seared into her dreams, his flashlight beam burning against her eyelids. One night she found herself standing outside, staring at the trees, shaking as the memory gnawed at her. Sam found her there, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You never forget the first," he said quietly. "Anyone who tells you they do is lying. But you learn to carry it. Not because you want to, but because you have to." She looked at him, tears stinging her eyes. "How many?" she whispered. He didn't answer. The silence was enough. Over time something shifted. The trembling in her hands steadied. The weight of a rifle became familiar. The fear in her chest didn't vanish, but it hardened into something else, resolve. She was no longer just Emily the waitress. She was becoming something she didn't yet have a name for, something Sam had seen in her long before she believed it herself. And then, one evening as the sun dipped low and the cabin lay in golden shadow, Sam handed her a new weapon. Sleek, black, heavier than any she had held before. A real rifle. Not for practice. For war. He placed it in her hands the same way he had at the fair, his eyes steady. "From here on out, you don't just train," he said. "From here on out, you're in this with me." Emily opened up at him. Her heart raced, fear and defiance colliding inside her. For the first time she didn't ask why. She simply nodded, gripping the rifle with hands that no longer shook. Somewhere deep inside, she understood the truth Sam had already spoken. There was no going back. The first test came sooner than either of them expected. Emily had grown used to the rhythm of training. The early mornings where her breath came in clouds as she pushed her body harder than ever before, the endless drills where Sam barked corrections, the nights spent memorizing the weight and feel of every weapon until it felt like part of her own body. She had begun to think that maybe they had time, that maybe the world outside had forgotten about them for a while. But the world never forgot men like Sam Callan, and it certainly wouldn't forget a woman who had stood beside him. It was a Tuesday evening, the sun sinking into a haze of copper and violet, when Emily noticed the silence first. She had been out back practicing with the rifle Sam had given her, her shoulder bruised from the recoil but her aim steadier than it had ever been. She reloaded, lifted the weapon again, then froze. The woods, usually alive with the chorus of cicadas and rustling leaves, had gone still. Too still. She lowered the rifle slowly, her instincts prickling in a way she couldn't explain. A moment later, Sam stepped out of the cabin, his expression tight. He had noticed it too. "Inside," he said. His voice was sharp, commanding, the tone of a man who didn't give orders twice. Emily obeyed, but her heart was already racing, her pulse drumming in her ears. Inside, Sam moved quickly, securing weapons, checking sight lines from the windows. Emily hovered, the weight of fear pressing against her ribs. "Tell me what's happening," she demanded. Sam glanced at her, his eyes hard. "They found us. We don't have long." The words dropped like a stone into her chest. She felt her throat tighten, but before she could speak again, the low growl of engines rumbled in the distance. Headlights cut through the trees, approaching the cabin from the dirt road. Emily's breath hitched. This was it. The moment Sam had warned her about. The moment she had trained for but never truly believed would come. Sam crouched by the table, sliding her a rifle. "Positions. You know what to do." Emily's hands trembled as she took it, the cold steel grounding her. Every lesson, every hour of sweat and tears, every shot fired in practice, all of it came crashing back in fragments. "Balance. Breathe. Don't fold." She swallowed hard and nodded, moving. Shook, but her mind clung to the rhythm he had drilled into her. The trucks came into view, 3 of them, each bristling with men dressed in dark gear. Their movements were precise, military. These weren't amateurs. Emily's stomach dropped as she counted at least 8, maybe 10. "Contractors?" she whispered. Sam's jaw clenched. "Worse. Contractors don't come in numbers like this unless someone's paying a fortune." He chambered around, his motions fluid, unhurried, as if this was just another night for him. For her, it was everything. The men fanned out, weapons raised, eyes scanning the cabin. Emily pressed her back against the wall, her pulse hammering so hard she thought they might hear it. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows like the woman she had once been. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone holding a rifle, someone Sam believed could fight. She forced herself to breathe, to remember the way the sights aligned, the way her finger curled steady on the trigger. The first shot came from Sam. A sharp crack that split the night, one of the men dropping before he could react. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, gunfire, the cabin's walls shuddering as bullets slammed into them. Emily ducked, her body trembling, but Sam's voice cut through the noise. "Pick your target. Don't waste it." Her breath stuttered. She rose, sighted through the window, and squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, the muzzle flash blinding her for a heartbeat. Through the haze, she saw one of the men stumble, clutching his side before collapsing. Her chest heaved, the sound of her shot ringing louder than the barrage outside. For a split second she froze. She had done it again. She had taken another life. But this time, the horror was joined by something else, the realization that she could. The fight raged on, the night alive with gunfire and shouted commands. Sam moved like a machine, precise and lethal, his presence a shield that seemed to hold the chaos at bay. Emily tried to mirror him, forcing her fear into focus, her trembling hands into control. She fired again and again, each shot steadier, each one finding its mark. But the enemy kept coming, their numbers pressing, their discipline unbroken. The cabin shook under the storm of bullets, glass shattering, wood splintering. At one point, a grenade clattered against the porch. Emily's eyes widened in terror, but Sam grabbed her arm and dragged her down just as the explosion ripped through the front wall. The blast sent them sprawling, dust and smoke choking the air. Emily coughed, her ears ringing, her chest burning. "We can't hold them," she shouted, panic breaking through. Sam's face appeared through the haze, calm even as blood trickled down his temple. "We don't need to hold them. We need to survive them." He pulled her toward the back, motioning to a hatch in the floor she hadn't noticed before. "Go," he barked. She hesitated only a moment before sliding down, the narrow passageway swallowing her into darkness. Sam followed, sealing the hatch above them. They crawled through the cramped tunnel, the sound of boots pounding overhead echoing down like thunder. Emily's heart raced, her body scraping against the earth as they moved. At last, the tunnel opened into the woods, moonlight spilling across them like salvation. They stumbled out, gasping, the cabin burning behind them, flames licking the night sky. Emily turned, her chest consumed by fire. Sam grabbed her shoulder, forcing her eyes away. "Don't look back," he said. "We're not done yet." Emily's breath shuddered, the weight of the rifle still in her hands. She realized in that moment that survival wasn't the end of it. This was only the beginning of a war she had never asked for, but one she could no longer escape, The woods swallowed them whole, the flames of the cabin shrinking behind them until the glow became no more than a smear against the treeline. Emily's legs ached, her lungs seared with every breath, but she didn't stop. Sam's hand on her shoulder kept her moving, his pace relentless, his body carrying a stamina she couldn't match but somehow had to. The rifle weighed heavy in her arms, every step driving home the truth that it wasn't just a weapon. It ran until the sound of pursuit faded into the night, until the only thing she could hear was the rasp of her own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Finally, Sam raised a hand, signaling her to stop. They crouched low behind a fallen log, the darkness pressing around them, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. Emily pressed her forehead to her knees, her chest heaving. "They burned it down," she whispered, the grief raw in her throat. Sam's voice was steady, but beneath it was something colder. "It was just wood and stone. A place can be rebuilt. But if we had stayed, we'd be ashes with it." He scanned the shadows, his rifle ready, his eyes alive with calculation. "They won't stop now. That cabin was a line in the sand. They crossed it. Which means this goes into the woods." His words crushed her, but even through the fear, she felt something strange stirring, a spark of anger. They had taken her home once already when they dragged her into the woods. Now they had taken his too. And if Sam was right, they would keep taking until there was nothing left. She lifted her head, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Then we make sure it's them," she said quietly, surprising even herself. Sam's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and for the first time since the night began, his expression softened. A flicker of approval crossed his face. "Good," he said. "But anger alone won't save us. Discipline will." He checked his compass, oriented them against the stars and motioned forward. "We move west. There's a contact I trust. Someone who owes me. If we can reach him, we'll have a chance." The journey was brutal. They trekked through the night, every sound in the forest sharpening Emily's nerves, every shadow a threat waiting to pounce. Twice, Sam signaled her to freeze as distant voices drifted through the trees, search parties sweeping the woods. Each time, Emily's heart threatened to explode, her finger tightening on the trigger, but Sam's hand on her arm kept her still until the danger passed. By dawn, exhaustion gnawed at her bones, her body screaming for rest. Sam finally led her to a rocky outcrop where the forest thickened into brush. They crawled into the cover of brambles, hidden from view, and collapsed side by side. Emily's chest heaved, her arms trembling, but she refused to let go of the rifle. It had become her anchor, the only thing keeping her from unraveling. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by the roar of gunfire and the flash of explosions. When she woke, Sam was already awake, watching the treeline with the patience of a predator. She pushed herself up, her body aching, her throat dry. "How far?" she asked. 3 days if we keep moving," he said. He studied her for a long moment. "You did well last night." The words were simple but they landed heavy. Emily felt a strange mix of pride and unease. She had killed again, survived again. And though the guilt still gnawed at her, there was also the undeniable truth that without her, they would already be dead. The second day tested her resolve even harder. Rain fell in sheets, drenching them as they trudged through mud that clung to their boots. Hunger gnawed at Emily's stomach, the meager rations Sam doled out barely enough to keep her moving. She stumbled more than once, her body pushed past limits she hadn't known existed. But every time she faltered, Sam's voice was there, calm and commanding. "One more step. One more breath. You keep moving." And somehow she did. That night, as they huddled beneath the skeletal remains of an abandoned barn, Emily finally broke the silence that had stretched between them. "Why me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why did you put that rifle in my hands at the fair? You could have chosen anyone, someone stronger, faster. Not me." Sam's eyes met hers across the darkness, lit faintly by the glow of the dying fire. "Because you weren't looking for it," he said. "Most people chase power or pretend they're ready for it. You didn't. But when it landed in your lap, you didn't run from it. That's rarer than you think." Emily swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She wanted to tell him she had run, that she had been terrified every step of the way, that she still was. But deep down she knew he was right. She hadn't let go. And now there was no going back. On the third night their luck snapped. They just crossed the ridge when the snap of a twig froze them both in place. Sam raised his fist, signaling silence, but it was already too late. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark, followed by the unmistakable click of a rifle's safety switching off. Voices barked commands in the night, and Emily's blood ran cold. They had been found. Sam's eyes flicked to her, sharp, commanding. "Remember what I taught you," he whispered. "Cover and fire. Move when I move. Don't think. Just act." Emily's grip tightened on the rifle, her body trembling with adrenaline. The forest around them exploded with gunfire, bullets shredding bark and leaves. She dropped to her stomach, returning fire in bursts just as Sam had drilled into her. The recoil slammed her shoulder, the noise deafening, but she didn't stop. For the first time, she wasn't a waitress anymore, cowering behind an apron and a smile. She was fighting side by side with a man who had trusted her with more than just a weapon.